Cemetery Whisperer, back at you again. Glad to speak to you, and I hope you enjoyed today's story. It's been a long day, been a hot day today. Here we are, end of July, 90-degree weather. Today's productivity was not quite what I like it to be, simply because of the heat. When it gets over 90 degrees, I can only go so long before I have to stop again. I thought you might be interested, though, in hearing some of my stories about the mass burials that I found on occasion. I found mass burials big mass burials in 3 or 4 cemeteries over the mapping time I've been doing this. 15 years I've been doing mapping of cemeteries, and this is a beautiful cemetery that we're sitting in right here, and it's very well kept. The sight lines are perfect, they're beautiful. Man, I could tell you stories of good cemeteries compared to the cemeteries that are not as well kept. This place is very good, though. It really is, and I've enjoyed today, and we'll be here a couple of more days. Today, ground penetrating radar, I probably found 15 unmarked burials, and no mass burials here, but I have found them before in different places. Once, I was in a large cemetery in a town near South Georgia, and there was an area, wide open area, beautiful grassy area, and we were walking through there, and we started finding unmarked burials. There was a perfect row of 17 unmarked burials. Perfect lines, all of them at the same depth, all of them facing perfect west to east, east to west. You could tell because they were at the same depth that obviously the burials were at the same time. Probably a trench was dug and the bodies were carefully placed in that trench. There was a row of 17, and then there was another row of 14 burials. So there you have it. You had 31 burials, mass burial, and no one knew they were there. There were no markers. There was nothing to indicate there were any burials at all. There was no paper, there was no story, but it was a mass burial. We found them there. Found out later, talking with the funeral director near there, he happened to come by one day, and he didn't know they were there either, but he did some research and found out that there had been some type of industrial accident, and the men who were in that industry that fateful day, that infamous day, they all died, and they lived out of country, so the only thing the city knew they could do would be to put them in a mass burial, and that's what they did. It was in a different day. It was probably in the 1800s. I have heard of what industry it was, but I don't need to give that to you right now. That's not pertinent to what we're talking about. But I was able to find them. I was able to put those 31 people back on the map, so to speak. That ground looked like it was a beautiful place for future burials, but because of that mass burial, it wasn't a good place at all. That was one place. Recently, I did a cemetery in North Carolina, and it was a 6-acre cemetery. I was there. I've been back and forth 3 or 4 times because I found so many unmarked burials in that cemetery that my time there had to be truncated, and then I had to come back again, and came back a 3rd time and finally finished up. Wonderful community, good people in the community. We were in a neighborhood cemetery. There were 6 acres of ground, just 6 acres of ground, and I first thought that I would be able to, I naively thought I'd be able to map it all within a week, and then I started finding the unmarked burials. In that one cemetery, that one 6-acre cemetery, I found over 1,600 unmarked burials. 1,600. They were from a different era, and I'll tell you the whole story later on down the road. But that was amazing how many unmarked burials I found there. Put them all on the map. The story goes that the cemetery was founded in the 1870s, and it wasn't until 1917 that the state of North Carolina required death certificates. And from 1917 till the cemetery was shut down in 1934, there were over 1,200 death certificates. When you drive up on the cemetery, there wasn't even 200 burial markers. This cemetery here has 5,000 burial markers. So imagine 6 acres, about the same size as this, but only 200 burial markers. And they had 1,200 death certificates. Interesting story. The cemetery had been there for 40 years before death certificates were required. So there's no telling how many people were buried in that cemetery without a death certificate to indicate where the people were buried. But I found over 1,600 unmarked burials, which I found to be quite high per acre. I've seen it like that in other places, but not quite that heavy. That was one place. I found another. There was another place that I went, another cemetery where I mapped the cemetery, and I found a mass burial, a large mass burial. It was, I would say, the burial area. I was mapping like I was doing here, walking back and forth, finding an unmarked burial here and there. And then all of a sudden I came upon a chasm. It was an area that was at least 40 feet wide and maybe 100 foot long. And when I started walking across it, I started seeing things that I see only occasionally. I'll see a previous forest tree or trees that have been pulled over into a ditch somewhere, and they cover it up with dirt. So I know what to look for there. I could see the trunks of trees, but these were small shadows that I was seeing on my ground penetrating radar. There's where, I'll be honest with you, there's where I started wondering how many children could be buried in that one open area. There was a lot, quite a few. I don't know how many hundred, and I wasn't able really to differentiate them. Maybe there was a pandemic. We've had those before in our generation now. Maybe it was a storm. It could have been a hurricane. It was near the ocean. It could have been a tornado. It could have been anything. I don't know what, but there was dozens at least, if not hundreds, of unmarks in that one open pit. You never know. You never know when you come to a place like this what you're going to find. Today was pretty typical, not unusual at all. I found 60 or so unmarked burials. We're collecting GPS points of the entire cemetery, and like I said, we've got 5,000 markers that we've got to take the picture as part of the GPS process. Imagine, just look at the cemetery we've got here. Just look around. Look at how many burials are out here. We take a picture of every single one of those markers. And if you're able to look closely, you'll see that on one marker, there might be as many as 10 people noted. 10 people. So I've got to find with GPR where those 10 people are located in front and behind that burial marker. But one marker might have 10. It could have 5, it could have 3, it could have 2, it could have 1. But imagine taking that picture 5,000 times in just a few days, and also taking that GPS point very close, centimeter accurate most of the time, whenever we're not under the trees, when we're out in the open like this valley of cemetery markers here. We'll get very, very precise maps, centimeter accurate, when in fact, a foot or 2 or 3, even 4 feet is not a problem. Most of the time it's not going to be an issue, because you're going to be right there in the proximity of where that burial is. Plus the GPR discovery, the ground penetrating radar discovery, unmarked burials, especially in the oldest part of the cemetery. You have to be precise with those as you can. But we're able to do that. We take pictures and we do all the ground penetrating radar. We go from fence post to fence post, corner to corner, and there's no making a shortcut. There's no way to do that. You've got to work hard to take every single picture. Every single person in this cemetery is a special person, and therefore we don't accidentally, we don't want to leave anybody out on the map. In our process, we have backups where we do 2 or 3 quality controls to make double sure that we've taken every single burial, every single cemetery that we work in. The maps are precise and the maps are valuable. We are able to help the owner of the cemetery. This cemetery is managed by a church, owned by a church. It's been here 150, maybe 175 years. Very well managed, but even in a cemetery like this, they need help managing their cemetery so that they know what is available to bury. Today, in only 2 acres, we were able to find, I would guess, at least 200 new burial spaces. And you hear the traffic going by here in this community. We're in a neighborhood that is relatively busy, surrounded by roads. It's landlocked. And this cemetery is doing everything it can to help know where they can have future burials. And we're able to help them be able to do that. But yeah, those mass burials, those are the ones that take your breath away. When all of a sudden you come up upon this island of people that didn't have any type of recognition of their death, there's something about that kind of gets your attention. You know what I mean? There's something about that. It's already, I understand how people can be unmarked. Their grave can be unmarked. Imagine the person was buried in the 1880s, and it was a rural area, and the family didn't have the wherewithal to afford expensive markers like these. All they could do is go get a piece of field stone out somewhere, maybe go down to a creek and get a creek bed stone, or maybe build a wooden cross and put it right there where their loved one was. Imagine doing that. And then it didn't take long before either someone picked up the stone. I've had that happen where the guy cutting the grass, the stone was in the way, he picked it up and threw it away. Or maybe the wooden cross fell over in a storm in the winter, in the spring. It fell over, and somebody walking along saw it, picked it up, threw it away, never knowing where the burial was. I've had even mass burials like these 700-800 pound burial markers where they are vandalized, or maybe a tree limb falls on them and cracks them, and that becomes an unmarked burial. I've had all sorts of things that I've seen in my 15 years for sure. But what we do is create a map. We take a snapshot of the cemetery today. This busting Bronco that we drove up when we drove in the gate, this was untamed territory. And now in just one day, we begin to break it. We begin to tame this cemetery. That's what we're doing. We're getting all the information so that the owner of the cemetery will be able to find where people are buried just that fast. And also they'll know exactly what space is available. The cemetery whisperer is able to come into a place like this, like the horse whisperer would do with horses. They would come into the paddock where a horse was, and the horse was just wild and bucking and just untamed. And then the horse whisperer, by having a calm voice and a calm demeanor and an organized, quiet way of overcoming the wildness of that stallion, the horse whisperer very soon, with his quiet voice, would begin to break the horse. You go read him. You go Google horse whisperer, and you'll see what I'm talking about. And that gave me the idea of giving you stories about the cemeteries where I map. I feel like after 15 years of doing this, I've mapped cemeteries in 20 states. I've told you that before, and I'm still amazed at that. All the way up to North Dakota, all the way to South Florida, Princeton, New Jersey, out to Madisonville, Texas. I've mapped 20 states. I think in those 15 years, I really have become the cemetery whisperer. I really have. I like giving order to this chaos. Oh, no. The family who their loved ones are buried right here, they always know where their loved ones are buried. But they don't know where their other church member families are buried, or they don't know where members of the community are buried until they get my map. And then they're able to see not only where people are buried with markers, they can hit a hyperlink and you can see a picture of the marker, a JPEG picture of every marker in this cemetery. Imagine how the genealogist will love that piece. The cemetery whisperer, I've broken this cemetery. I'm breaking it. It's still bucking. Oh yeah, oh my goodness, it's bucking on a 93-degree day. Let me tell you, I've had to drink a gallon of water plus just to be able to get to this point. It's been a hard day. But what I'm doing is I'm whispering to the cemetery, and I won't stop until the cemetery is calm. And I'm able to give the client a map of what I've discovered. And by giving them that map, they will have a permanent way to view their cemetery. And from a cool office somewhere for the rest of the duration they will be able to know where that cemetery, where people are in that cemetery. They can create the map in such a way it can be searchable online. We're in the process of going back and getting all of our data over the previous 15 years. And eventually, I'm giving you a heads up here, we're going to have a store, a cemetery store, where you can go and look at the cemeteries in your community where I've mapped. You'll be able even to purchase the cemetery map. You'll even have the capacity to be able to if you want to have your cemetery mapped, you can call us and we'll do it. We've got some ideas for you that we might even be able to help you do it inexpensively. All you've got to do is contact us. Len@omegamapping.com. Len@omegamapping.com. I'm in the process of putting together a Cemetery Whisperer website. I'm also in the process, as you can see, we're going to have these extended videos on YouTube so that you'll be able to keep up with the Cemetery Whisperer and you'll hear stories about what we're doing. And I look forward to doing that. You'll be able to go to a cemetery store. You'll be able to have access to a large database. I bet I know I've mapped more than 300 cemeteries. And I would guess, I bet you I've found, no kidding, I don't have a record of it, but I would say I found at least 300,000 unmarked burials. 300,000 unmarked burials. I bet I've taken, it's getting close. It's over 700,000 JPEG pictures of cemeteries. Imagine that. Imagine that database. If one of your cemeteries is in that database, it will be shared across the country. Imagine that. Imagine having a database where you could type in the name of someone in a cemetery in Devils Lake, North Dakota. Devils Lake, North Dakota. You could type in a name and be able to see exactly where that person's buried and be able to see a JPEG picture of that person. Imagine a small church cemetery in South Alabama. Typing in a name and you'll be able to see exactly where that person's buried. Not only that, you'll be able to find a map on how to drive your car to that cemetery in order to get out and find that loved one. Imagine that. Yeah, there's a lot of things that are happening. And I'm so proud the idea of being a cemetery whisperer has come to me over the years. I've been having that domain, thecemeterywhisperer.com. It doesn't have a website there yet, but it will soon. And there's where we'll stay in touch, where you can turn and see what I've done, see some of the stories that I've created, and you can share them with your friends. And we'll create reels on Facebook and Instagram, and we'll have a social media relationship. I want to write a book. I want to write a book as well of telling all the stories of what I've experienced in these 15 years. Never did I know, never did I have a clue when I was growing up in Macon, Georgia, and I went to the Rose Hill Cemetery in Macon, and really, that was where I learned to drive as a 16-year-old kid. I was 16 in the early 70s, and that was exactly the same time that the Allman Brothers were going through two different tragedies where the Allman Brothers band lost two of their founding members. You remember Dwayne Allman and also, I'm trying to remember the other one. All of a sudden he leaves me. But yeah, I would go to their cemetery spot in Rose Hill Cemetery, but to get there you had to go around in these real tight turns. And as a 16-year-old, not only was I learning how to drive in a tight place like that, but I think the Cemetery Whisperer was being born there. The burials there are phenomenal. There's 72 acres of unique. Not only do you have the Allman Brothers there, but there are other famous people buried in that cemetery. And I believe the Cemetery Whisperer was being born there. I never knew it. And now, many years later, 15 years now as a mapper, I've mapped cemeteries in so many diverse places that I look forward to telling you the story. So hang in there and keep in touch. I'll make sure we do all the publicity so that you'll know when the next Cemetery Whisperer story comes up, and you'll be able to go to cemeterywhisperer.com, thecemeterywhisperer.com. Thecemeterywhisperer.com will be a place where we can have stories on a regular basis, and you'll learn more about what we do. It's been an honor to talk to you today. It's been an honor and a pleasure to share with you what I do in the cemeteries when I map. Have a good day.